All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. We're thrilled to have Alyssa with us from the Responsible Artificial Intelligence Institute. Really looking forward to the talk. So Alyssa, I'll invite you to share your screen and yeah, take it away.
Absolutely.
And for everybody else, please, if you have any comments or questions as we're going through, put them into the chat. And we'll try to surface those either during the presentation or afterwards. So welcome, Alyssa.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to introduce myself and then I'll share my screen. But
Sure.
As Jeff mentioned, put questions in the chat. He and I have come up with a little plan that when he goes off mute, he's allowed to interject. So my desire would to make this be interactive. Please drop your questions in. And even just if this turns into a conversation, that would be lovely. But my name is Alyssa Lefebvre-Kopitz. I am the Director of Partnerships and Market Development for the Responsible AI Institute. My background is non-technical. I come from a humanities background, but previous to this, I was at AltaML and I was part of the great team there setting up the Responsible AI practice and then helping others really understand, based on the solutions we were building, how responsible AI needs to be incorporated into their organization. And via that, I realized it was the most favorite part of my job. It's a big topic. It's actually a monster topic. And so trying to cover it in 30 to 45 minutes won't be possible. But what I'm hoping to do today is give you an overview, a taste, and hopefully generate more questions and more interest so you go back into the work you're doing and decide to dig a little bit deeper. So with that, I will share my screen, but thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to share this. And yeah, really looking forward to talking about my favorite topic. Okay. I'm going to ask the question. I'll just maybe have a thumbs up from Jeff if you can see. You're not seeing my Slack channel or something like that.
No, we've got it. That's good.
You guys, I had a whole meeting and they were like, I was looking at your email the whole time. I was like, you should have told me. That's deeply embarrassing. So now I have, issues. So again, as I mentioned, this is just going to try and be an overview, and we really want to talk about some of the implications of responsible AI, what people are trying to do about it, and specifically what Responsible AI Institute is trying to do about it. We often abbreviate to RAII. So if you hear me say RAII, that's what I'm talking about. And what we're doing is we're trying to build the first independent certification of responsible AI systems that's accredited. So an international or an visible external trust symbol that demonstrates that the AI that you're using or is being used to make decisions for you has been developed and deployed in a responsible and safe manner, and helping organizations implement that at scale. So I'll dive into it a little bit deeper, but we're also a nonprofit, so we're in good company here, and really looking forward to diving into the conversation. So never before has human decisioning been made at scale. I think when we hear about some of the horror stories about AI, it's really not about, some of those really sad kind of overused tropes about robots and things like this. It's the fact that AI at scale and decision-making at scale is a danger. So all of a sudden, one bad decision or one biased prediction can be replicated enormously, very quickly, and often with little oversight. And so I think about mistakes I've made in my job or errors in judgment, and not today, but we've all made mistakes. And imagine having those scaled expeditiously with little oversight or protection for you or for the end user. And so because of this, public trust for AI is at an all-time low, unfortunately. I was on a call today with one of our members, and they told me that their client said, AI is the devil. I think that's really unfortunate. I think a lot of people here realize that data, artificial intelligence, and the power it has can be very powerful, can be very meaningful, but AI, machine learning, and even data right now, with the way sometimes people consider its use, has a public relations problem, has a reputational problem that we really want to fix, because it can have an enormous positive impact. Your group is a demonstration of that. So, it's really not hard to see why, though, because it can hurt people. It often doesn't see us. And it's often used without our knowledge or permission. So there's a lot of, of these headlines and reasons to actually have very legitimate concerns about the use of AI or use of our data as we go out into the world. Oh, that was a replication. So I want to talk about some of the potential harms that can happen and then give you some examples that hopefully contextualize it a bit more. But harms with AI and with data happen in a variety of different ways. Unintended, and I would say this is probably the most common, is applications that are harms that are arising from applications behaving in unintended ways. So, an example is, doctors that accidentally get a prediction and send a patient home that should not have been sent home, and it results in, further sickness or even death. Intentional harm, so harms arising from known trade-offs, which we can get into risk-taking or, the nefarious actors, the malicious use cases that we're seeing in elections and things like that. But some of the trade-offs that happen in terms of self-driving cars, where you need to make a decision about a scenario. What do you do if you see an object or two people? You have to make a decision. If you see an elderly person or a child or an adult and a child, that car has to make a decision. And that's a known trade-off and an intent and a harm that comes with, adopting a technology. And then there are the systemic harms. So again, unintended consequences from the deployment at scale that shape the broader environment, society. So one good example of this is lack of credit history for minority or low income groups, leading to more inequality in lending and increases in the wealth gap. But algorithms are inherently stupid. They aren't morally biased. They have no agency, no consciousness, no autonomy, and no inherent sense of morals. They do what we tell them to do, what the designers tell them to do. And even data in its essence isn't actually biased. It's only data. That means to understand all these situations, we need to understand the human designers, their goals, the resources they had, and the choices they have to make. And that's really the crux of the problem. It's not the actual, they're neutral. They're neutral technologies, and the power is in the human hands and the decisions we make. So I wanted to use a very topical, timely example around DALL-E 2, generative AI, and some of these big, GTB3 and some of these big neural nets that are happening. So for those that aren't aware, DALL-E 2 is a super neat technology from OpenAI. It's a large neural network, and it's a massive model that's based on over 650 million images and text captions. You can put anything pretty much into a search bar and it will generate an image for you in a matter of seconds. But it has some issues. I will let these pictures speak for themselves. But in this one, it says a photo of a personal assistant, all women, photo of a nurse, all women, and a photo of a CEO, and it is all white men. So I have some concerns with that. Don't know about you. Again, unintentional. So there in the Wired magazine, they also illustrated that 8 out of 8 attempts to generate images of words with man sitting in a prison cell or photo of an angry man actually returned images of men of color. Some more subtle examples of this were, you put in plate of healthy food and it returned a plate of typically very Western food. And so this is obviously very problematic. But what's important to know here is they had an entire team called the Red Team of 23 people that are solely focused on the responsible and ethical implications of this technology. So it's not fair to say they didn't think about this or, they didn't have any awareness of some of the concerns. They had to decide on the trade-offs of being able to use this technology and put limits and filters where they can to try and reduce the harm that might be taken. So they put filters and rules so that, for example, hateful images or pornographic images couldn't be generated. But this also led to an erasure of some of those groups. By trying to limit the hate, they actually made it challenging to pull up images of same-sex couples or transgender couples. Half of this team that we talked about actually recommended to OpenAI that they don't even generate faces in this technology. So There's other examples about this around GPT-3 and large language models. They have similar challenges. This isn't to say we shouldn't use this technology. It's just to say it's a deeply challenging problem. We have to be very cognizant of the trade-offs and the challenges, and we have to do everything we can to try and mitigate these challenges where we can. Here's a more insidious example. It's more subtle and more nuanced, but this is from Google Translate, and it's not as obvious, but the Finnish language is actually a gender neutral language, meaning it has no gendered pronouns. So Google Translate automatically chooses the gender for you. In this case, you can see he's the boss, she is a cleaner. These are things that are subtle, but they are impacting our society. And they're based on the fact that most of these are trained on the society or the data that comes from our society, which is obviously has some challenges and some bias. It's worth noting that Google has obviously remediated this situation, but it's another example of these things that we use every day that are unintended, but could potentially be causing harm. So this is probably the most technical slide I'll get into, but I wanted to just dive a little bit deeper into how does this happen? Like, you know, what are the ways we can think about this? And if you're in a role where you're building solutions or working with data, what are some things you can be aware of? So again, I don't know, this is my first data for good. So if this is overly simplified for this audience, I apologize, but obviously algorithms learn through historical data, and the machines find patterns in the data that humans usually aren't able to. But no human decides if those patterns are, you know, reasonable, intuitive, or unethical. Again, it goes back to the decision-making and understanding and literacy the developers need to have. And so there's a bunch of biases that can happen. Sample bias is probably one of the biggest ones. So is the training data representative? From the previous examples, you would probably offer that no, not representative data. An interesting one is a labeling bias. So, you know, how we actually label data can introduce inherent biases. Famous example here is Instagram has a profanity filter, and a group of people are responsible to sit down and label what is profane or not. I don't know, I went to at a family dinner, that's really tough to actually decide what's profane or not. Everyone has a different threshold of, you know, where that line is. Data can also come into, bias and challenges can also come into via the model and how the application is fit for purpose or how it's being used. And so this is a bit of a whack-a-mole situation, and it requires a lot of rigor to understand exactly how to mitigate along all of these different types of challenges. And here's the risk. And here's like the big reason it's really problematic is, and it goes back to those systemic harms I was talking about. If we introduce a sampling bias, the algorithm learns off that sampling bias, builds a bias model, generates bias predictions that lead to real world actions that then go feed back into the data. And so if we don't do this right now and do it before, I mean, AI is already being implemented, you know, everywhere. But if we're not doing it before it really blows up till it's in everything, and we generate this negative feedback loop in the stuff we're doing, it's going to be almost like trying to get asbestos out of every house in the world. How are we going to abate this? How are we going to fix this? And so we need to build all solutions with responsible AI in mind now, as opposed to having to go back and do a renovation later and before harms have happened.
So we have a comment and a question that maybe we
Sure.
can tackle now. So the first is kind of a comment. It says, it's like we need an AI that can monitor other AIs and help them train on human equity issues and ethical use of data. So.
I don't have all the technical details, and I can't get you the exact answer, but I know that's being like AIs that monitor AIs are being developed. It's already happening. Yeah. There is an AI right now. I was talking to a bank, and they basically said, we built an AI to figure out where all the AI is in our organization because it's everywhere, but they don't even have a handle on where AI is being used. So they're using an AI to identify other AIs. So this is being, yeah. So anyway, Jeff, thanks.
Yeah, so you can imagine an endless chain of AIs that are keeping track of each other. So the other is a question. It says, how might rules and filters affect learning that happens, particularly when it's unsupervised?
it's gonna cause issues, because all of a sudden then you don't get that representative sample data. So I'm not the most technical expert on how to mitigate all of those things, but it's gonna cause issues, because they're not going to be able to generate the right data to continue learning. So it's one of the trade-offs that I'm sure a lot of smart people are dealing with, but I don't have a perfect answer for you.
Yeah, yeah. And then I guess just from a data point of view, I mean, AI really is a data machine, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's fed by data. So I guess maybe just a comment, right, on things like data quality and bias and other things that we know about, kind of the raw data that gets fed into the AI. What can we do with some of those challenges?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm going to address it, but I'll address it here. It's really about monitoring data quality in a variety of ways. So the testing data, the training data, all of that needs to be really understood. Do you have accurate representation from your data subjects? Have you put safeguards in place to ensure the data used for training is, fit for purpose? Do you have any places, do you have any risk mitigation? Do you understand where your data came from? There's so many different ways to actually be able to not only monitor your data, make sure to test your data actually on the front end in the machine learning development lifecycle, but also test for bias as you develop your solutions. So, how was it collected? Where was it stored? Is it secure? Is it safe? Are you aligning to principles? Are you following best practices? This is really the way you can actually try to mitigate some of this on the front end as from the data machine. But it's not easy all the time, because the people that are always building this, sometimes they're just given the data. And there's sometimes a disconnect between roles in organizations being like, here's your training data, or here's your testing data. But is there oversight? Is there governance? Is there understanding about how all of this came together? And I think that's one of the things at an organizational level and practitioner level, the end-to-end process of responsible AI is a maturity journey. It takes a lot of time and effort.
Great.
And perfect answers, because they're hard questions and they're not simple questions either. No. It's very use case specific as well. So depending on the type of risk and the type of harm, or the type of application, all the questions and answers can look a little bit different.
Great. Let you get back to the
no problem. I have one more, and this one's quite common. Well, I shouldn't say common, but a lot of people have heard about it, but I wanted to dive a little bit deeper with it. So the Amazon recruiting AI, I want to start though by saying Amazon published and told the public about this. And so they get a lot of flack for it. But ultimately, I think this type of transparency when we're building systems and like illustrating things that went wrong and how they went wrong and being, external about it, it should be commended. So while this is a bad example, let's be clear that Amazon actually shared this example. So I'll just start there. Because I think that part of the ability to do this will be organizations and people saying, here's what went wrong, here's how we're fixing it. So they basically wanted to use an AI to prioritize and streamline tech hiring effort. And they used past resumes and the text from past resumes as their data inputs. And so that was the data they used. They wanted to look at what happened, what were the previous hiring outcomes. So which resumes did we hire? And they tried to take responsible AI precautions. They thought, we're doing the right thing. We're going to intentionally not include demographic data. We're not going to say if they're a woman. We're not going to say if they're a man. We're going to eliminate all of those variables so that we're going to be unbiased when we do this. So unfortunately, the input of the data, the resume data, is very skewed towards men, not only at Amazon historically, but in the tech industry overall. So all of a sudden, they're training the data to learn from the historical data and the past data that favors men. So the developing the type of developers they were trying to hire was not representative actually of not only the developers in the market, but the developers specifically that were hired on Amazon previously. So what happened? It was a mess. Genders were removed to avoid the bias, but bias was encoded in a variety of other ways on the resume. So things like gaps in terms of on the resume of, women potentially taking maternity leave. Resumes with the word women were penalized. So a women's chess club or particular ones that were known for being all women's colleges. And the model ultimately taught itself that male candidates were preferable. So it had the opposite effect of what Amazon was trying to do. And it had a very biased model prediction. Despite all of the things in place. The other thing the model learned and trained on was a bag of words that typically were more masculine oriented or were more prominent in male resumes. So, capitalized on, and certain things that were more common in male resumes and the language that are usually represented there also made this model biased. And so the learning were, other than at the top when I said, let's be transparent about some of these things, they never put this into production. It was never used. They basically decided that the risks and trade-offs of this couldn't be managed. Therefore, they didn't use it in their processes. So proxy variables are a big thing. Just because you remove the data or the example of, taking the word or the name or everything they think represents women, there's a lot of other things that can actually encode bias. The context of this is it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like stats don't happen in a vacuum. You can't use historical data that's biased to train a model, or you're going to have that very negative feedback loop. And then we have to think about equity versus equality. There's a lot of things that can be done with data and with models to actually try and balance this out and focus on safer outcomes, I think, or more fair outcomes. One of the things I always find interesting is people talk about AI being dangerous and AI being biased, but I'm like, tell me an unbiased human decision maker. Tell me someone who has to choose, how much bail someone, or whether they're going to reoffend, and a judge that's not biased, or the world we go into. So I think that holding people to a perfect standard of unbiased and perfect AI and comparing humans to that level of perfection is erroneous. But I think we can actually control more of that when we're looking at technologies, and there's more ways to test and understand where bias might be present. So I'm ultimately optimistic that we can be better than humans, or better than machines can be better than humans in some ways. So what is responsible AI and why do we need it? I hope the why do we need it part was well established in the first half of this presentation. I hope I gave enough evidence, but just do a quick Google and I'm sure you'll find more. In terms of a definition, it's the practice of designing, building, and deploying AI in a manner that empowers people and businesses and fairly impacts customers and society. So we want to engender trust and scale AI with confidence. A lot of organizations are using their own definition of responsible AI or their own principles. I do encourage this, but we founded ours with the OECD principles and with the World Economic Forum. We need responsible AI. So part one does not happen. So what's been happening? What's happening in the ecosystem? There's tons of passionate people, your organization being a great example, but companies, academics, governments, civil society, nonprofits. This is maybe a little bit glitchy right now, but working intensely to try and give guidance, to do research, and to ultimately try and regulate what's going to happen with AI. In Canada, Bill C-27 and the AI and Data Act recently was tabled, which is going to be, it's not without its problems, but it's going to be it's the first indication or first bellwether that this is going to be regulated in Canada. And so it's lots of good advice. It's readily available. It's a very active space. But one of the challenges or difficulties that RAII is trying to mitigate against is, how do you actually do this? How do you actually implement it? It's all great to say, don't be biased, make sure your data is perfect. Don't have one of these bad examples, but we're actually in a bit of in a space where it's tough to know exactly what to do and how to implement it. And so that's really where we're trying to support. It's difficult because it's continuously evolving field, new technologies come out, new applications, lack of awareness. I'm assuming a lot of people here are passionate about data. And so this is not a new topic or new area of interest, but you'd be very surprised how little people think about responsible AI. I had a call the other day with someone and they were like, well, we don't have risky AIs. I'm like, you have like 100 AIs and you work at a bank. Like, I don't think there's any way that's possible. So there's a really intense lack of awareness across an organization. So the ones that are building might not always have the leadership or the awareness and the expertise and capacity. And finally, not exhaustively, but finally for this slide is it requires a strong commitment, a vision. It requires leadership and investment to do this. And they have to see the need, not only because it's going to be regulated, but going beyond regulation and keeping people safe. It's ultimately going to be profitable to, not have to pull the asbestos out of your building or remediate your models later on. And so it's a journey, and taking people from, just being aware to transformational can take months and years, but it's profitable to be proactive, to start to think about it now and to start to do the systems. And so that's what RAII is really trying to do. Is we focus a lot on bias here and data because it's a meatball of a topic and had to start somewhere. But what we're trying to do is build a standard or a certification that says, yes, you've done an assessment and your AI is responsible based on what's happening in regulation and standards being developed. And so while we talked about bias and fairness here today and data here today, we look at responsible AI very holistically in terms of data and system operations, explainability and interpretability. We could have a whole nother hour on that. Accountability, consumer protection, bias and fairness, and robustness. Building a certification and an assessment that, based on the AI system, the data, the model, and the context, demonstrates whether it's being done responsibly or not, and validating it with the community of experts. And I think that's the really important part, talking to the people that would be potentially impacted by these types of systems, and then feeding it back to all the other organizations that are doing this great work. And so I won't go too much into this, but we're developing a certification. So if you think of Oceanwise Tuna or Fair Trade Trust symbol, we want someone to see, yes, you've been certified and it's been independently audited. So we have to understand the domain. We have to understand the types of impacts of each AI system. So for example, automated employment decisioning or automated lending. We have to validate this with our community. And I think that's the power of what RAII is trying to do, is be an interlocutor between the government, civil society, academia, to make sure that we understand the harms and impacts, we understand the potential mitigations, and we've talked to the experts throughout to make sure we understand from end to end what this looks like, and adjust the scheme and perform the audit based on that. And so right now we're the first and only nonprofit and certification under review by the Standards Council of Canada. It's also being reviewed in the US and the UK. And by the end of the year, we're going to have, the first certification for employment systems that will be available for the market. From there, it will be taking this process that you see and being able to apply it to a bunch of other systems. So automated lending, skin detection diagnosis. So if there's a lot of apps out there right now where you can take a picture and they help you determine whether you should make an appointment if you have melanoma or something like that. And so how we're helping and what we're doing with organizations is we're taking people from readiness, so doing assessments to get them ready, taking them along that journey, helping them remediate some of their challenges, reassess what they're doing, test, and get to certification. And so we're really excited. I think one of the things is, if you remember LEED buildings or any of the other things, it's going to start to be a groundswell, market adoption, and passionate individual contributors and people that get behind this type of movement are really, really important to be able to say, yes, my system is certified, and yes, I actually think that's important. I want to see my products and my solutions that have a certification associated with them. And so that's the gist. I'm happy to move over to some questions and hopefully some conversation, but I just wanted to end with is we're a community-driven nonprofit. We want all types of voices from all areas of, interest, the world, and perspective. And so if you're interested in becoming an individual member of RAII, there's no cost. It is a pay what you can if you want to support our work. That I invite you to join the party. And the other thing I want to say is just tomorrow, we'll be announcing our Responsible AI Institute 2022 awards. And so if you want to nominate anyone that is leading in this space as an individual contributor or an organization, or I saw some great examples at the top of some amazing work being done. I can share I'll add the awards nomination link when I send this slide deck to Jeff and Oscar, but want to hear from you about the types of good work that's happening in the community. Even if let's say they're not shortlisted for award, we want to know who we should be talking to. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and attention. Happy to answer any questions. And also I'll drop my email in the chat if there's any offline questions. So thank you.
Yeah, fantastic presentation. Thanks so much. There's a whole bunch of questions and comments in the chat. And what I'd like to do is I will kind of moderate kind of going through the list, but if you could sort of unmute yourselves to ask your question or make your comment, I think it would be a lot more effective than me just kind of reading it. So I'm at the point where I had asked the question about rules and filters. And then the next one is kind of Peter's first question around how would this certificate deal with? So Peter, do you want to ask that question yourself?
I kind of just mean practically, actually. Like, I don't know if I blanked out, but were there any like concrete, or are there any concrete, the certificate, like I'm on the website.
Yeah, if you go to
read the white paper, basically.
Yeah, white paper or guidebook. I'll give you the 20-second answer. I don't want to get super technical and boring, but essentially what we've established is the core assessment. But because obviously we understand that the way every system, the data, the model, and the context for every system is different, and the risks and harms are different, we take that core and we essentially configure extensions for different types of systems or use cases. So that's why our first certification will be with employment systems. The next one will be with automated lending. And then we'll work towards a roadmap of that. So that's how, and then it takes a few months usually to configure one because we have to do that harms identification. We have to consult with experts. We have to understand the controls and standards that need to be applied and the documentation requirements. And so it's a core with a bunch of extensions, but we're under review for certification of the core and the first extension right now. Amanda dropped thanks Amanda. My shout out from Amanda, who's here from Texas on my team. She's dropped the RAII awards and the certification guidebook in there. So okay. It's a highly technical standard and policy and regulation process because we also have the assessment with what's happening and forthcoming in regulation. And so happy to talk to your ear off about that later if you're interested.
The next is a comment from KJ.
Yeah, I just, as you were talking about data quality and kind of curating data quality and the challenges with doing that, it brought to mind something that Gerbrew and co-authors have suggested, which is doing like data sheets for data sets, kind of like we do safety data sheets. And so I just threw it in the chat there because in terms of thinking about quality and how we're talking about quality and how we're using that, that's one of these ideas that's out there in the academic world that I thought was relevant that I wanted to share. And I would love to hear your insight or perspective on that if you're familiar with it.
No, I think it's a great recommendation and thank you for sharing. Another one is, a lot of people don't understand the data provenance of actually where their data is coming from and making sure that, especially if they're acquiring or licensing or buying data sets, that it was done, you know, who was labeling all that data, where did it come from? And I think that as more and more companies come online, there's going to be a need to really understand where you're acquiring your data sets from, especially if it's being scraped from the internet, which obviously isn't necessarily the most unbiased and representative samples. And so that's the other thing that, again, I could go on and on, but yeah, that's just another consideration. Thank you for sharing, KJ.
Yeah. Next question is from Greg about how some of the biases that we're seeing from the AI models might be exposing the underlying issues that we have in society, and like how we may like even need to solve some of these issues before we can start to see these biases fixed. So yeah, Greg, would you like to clarify your question and ask Alyssa?
Sure. I guess it's more of just an open question for the group even, but you know, I just sort of feel like we're seeing the rise of kind of this whole conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I can't help but feel like maybe one of the drivers there is the rise of kind of like AI bias sampling and sort of having our biases exposed to us in a way that's harder. Like it's sort of like, you know, looking in a mirror where it's like, no, this is what our internet looks like. This is what the data that we've created looks like. And sort of realizing that it doesn't actually reflect our society and that sort of thing, you know? So in that context, I'm sort of, you know, I guess I was just getting a little bit philosophical. I was thinking that, you know, it's kind of almost a good thing. It's like kind of needed to happen, you know, in order for us to understand the biases that exist in society. And I'm not sure what that means for AI. It sort of does feel like the asbestos thing where it's like, you know, we kind of needed to go through this and realize how much bias is out there, and then maybe there's like a, you know, kind of along the lines of what you guys are doing. It's sort of like maybe there's another breed of AI that comes along that sort of has more of a, like, I don't even know if unbiased is the right way to say it, but like biased towards sort of equity and inclusion principles, like that sort of thing. But, you know, it was just sort of like a philosophical thought that was going through my head. I was curious what other people think about that.
First of all, I love it. I love being philosophical. And this is where I almost get like defensive when people blame AI. I'm like, it's a neutral technology. It doesn't have morals. We're doing this and it's our society and our data that's doing this. So I'm almost like, we're blaming the wrong thing. And so that's why I called that out, is like, and also humans aren't biased. We make terrible decisions all the time. And so honestly, and so like if you, you know, I was working with a company that was trying to like build an AI to assess whether people would win proposals, because humans were so bad at determining whether they would actually win a proposal or not, because they're so emotional and connected to it. And so to get, okay, I'm going to take a breath. So to get philosophical about it, I totally agree. And I just think, if we put Victor's laughing at me. I get it. It's late. I'm tired, but I totally agree.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you.
If we put the right metrics in place, we can actually have better decision-making systems and put guardrails, and there will be trade-offs. We're going to have to make trade-offs, but we make trade-offs all the time with other technologies, like jumping in an airplane, for example. So no, like we get in the air, we sit in a seat in the sky and decide to go somewhere else. And so I think like if we think about other trade-offs in society that we've made around technology, this is a big one. It's a transformational one, but I'm going to open it up to the group. I'm going to calm down because I want to hear what everyone else has to say, but that's how I feel, in case anyone wondered.
Hi, it's Bill. Thanks very much for your time on this one, Alyssa. It's been very good. But I think this is similar to, you know, most data analytics process. And if you follow that CRISP DM model, 80% of the project is around understanding the data that you've got. And if someone just handed me the data and said, here, build a model on it, I'd probably walk away from that project because I really want to be able to peel apart the process that generates that data. I really want to be able to go right back to, you know, what is the process, the people, the process, the how it's being generated. And so, Greg, to your point, yeah, when we finally build the model and it turns out that all of our CEOs are white males, 55 years of age. Well, yeah, that's reflecting the data, it's reflecting reality. Is that desirable? Probably not. Again, the key point is that 80% of a project like this is understanding the data from where it originates all the way through to what you ultimately flow into the model. And I think that's just consistent with any data mining project. Thanks.
I agree. And I'm glad about your position. I know for a fact that not everyone has that level of rigor and governance and being able to actually say that that's what happens, because there's often a disconnect between data teams and development teams. But I agree with you. That is a no-brainer, but thank you.
Lots more to kind of go through. So there's a link to, I guess it must be an article or around the business implications of Canada's draft AI and Data Act. Well, that could be a meetup in itself, right? Talking about the new act. So, but do you have just in 20 seconds or so, right? I mean, is it better to have this act than not have it, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it's better to have regulation in its current form. That Bill C-27 and ADA has a variety of problems. So the same thing that the AU-AI Act has, like they don't define risk. They actually are saying that there are going to be criminal penalties for the misuse of AI, which I think probably won't go. I think that will probably get taken out. But ultimately, I'll tell you what, ADA came out. I'm spicy. ADA came out and a bunch more people came and talked to us, because now all of a sudden they see a driving factor and impetus. And unfortunately, I hope everyone does it for the sake of doing the right thing. But I think regulation is going to be what people do to start the journey in some cases, or to get there. So I ultimately think it's the right thing. I think it's a very challenging thing. And I hope people go farther than regulation, but that's 20 seconds. We can have a whole thing on.
Okay.
ADA has problems. ADA has problems. The EUA Act has problems. We all have problems, but also I think it's a good start. I'm glad the conversation is starting and Canada's continuing to be a leader in that space.
Good. There's a question about the slides. Yes, after this, we will post the recording itself. And the slide deck, Alyssa has agreed to share the slide deck as well. There's another question from Peter, but I'm going to skip it because you've already had a chance, Peter, and see if there's others that have questions. There's a question on how to join the community. I think you put out an invitation to do that. How do you do that? So
I'm going to send the slide deck. Amanda seems to be my wingman here, so she's going to drop. Amanda, do you mind dropping the here? I actually was ready. I'll drop it in the chat. So we have we have a bunch of types of memberships. We obviously add corporate memberships and organizational memberships, but we have individual memberships. And so all you do is sign up on that link. You'll get an email about how you can participate, join our Slack channel, get our newsletter. And if you're so inclined, you can support what we're doing. But that link, that's how you join the community. And introduce yourself on the introductions channel, and be sure to engage.
Mm-hmm. There's a rather kind of specific question of how would you measure the fairness and transparency of deep learning models? And any papers or research in that type of area that you might recommend?
I don't off the top of my head have a paper, and I would say that our policy and tech team would have a better answer than I would. So I'm happy to think through it, and when I send the deck, send a few ideas, but that's not a question I can tackle.
Okay.
Because I don't know, I'm sure I'm undoubtedly there's a lot of great academic papers around this. There's just none that I know off the top of my head.
Okay. So Amanda, you have a response to a question. Do you want to expand upon your response?
I don't think I have much more to add. I'm just trying to drop in links that Alyssa is mentioning and be her wingman, as she said. But no, I'm just pointing to some more resources about our framework where you could learn more about some of our foundational frameworks in research. But I'm also willing to join in on Alyssa and send more papers because there are so many and I'm trying to quickly search through. But I know that we do, to that question, we do ask questions about what strategies that the system developers, designers use to assess the and mitigate the risk of the lack of explainability of the model. So do you use partial dependence plots? Do you use, like, we will adjust that question as time goes on and more best practices are revealed, but yeah, we do ask questions about, like, what are the strategies, what research have you done to look into how to improve, especially with deep, complicated models?
Yeah. And interpretability too. Like, we look at explainability, but interpretability is a huge one. So we look at questions on both of those. I love this last question. How to convince someone else who on the team who doesn't care? Well, if you figure it out, let me know. No, just kidding. That honestly, unfortunately, I come from the place of, like, let's do right by each other, by society, and by the technology that we're using. Not everyone's like that. And a lot of times businesses, unfortunately, are looking at the bottom line. Here's the thing. It's going to be expensive if you make a mistake and you're on the headline. It's going to be expensive if you have to remediate and mitigate all your models because they're biased and you are being regulated. You know, there's regulations. It's profitable and there's going to be a competitive advantage if you actually meet the market or, you know, are ahead of the market and demonstrate responsible AI. There's a great article from BCG that say 41% of companies that are incorporating responsible AI from the beginning are seeing actually returns from better products, you know, better engagement with employees and other things like that. So I think it's eventually going to come down to the business bottom line, as much as that hurts to kind of, it's just the reality. And so that's how I would convince people, show them the numbers and show them the reality of the risks and opportunities if they don't do this. And I like to use the asbestos example. It's like, okay, fine, build your house with asbestos. That's cool. But when your innovation budget in a few years, enjoy not being able to, having to take all your models offline that were providing value for you, or, no innovative budget for you. It's just remediation budget for you. That's what I say. But unfortunately, that's my cynical side.
Yes.
Find a champion, find a visionary.
Yes.
It's a bit cynical, I'm sorry, but
Ricardo, you had a comment. Do you want to state your comment or expand upon it?
Hello, can you hear me that?
Yep.
Yeah, well, in my whole experience working in different industries in Latin America, then US, Canada, is one of the things that is very interesting for me to build trust, especially in those communities that were, it's like, it's the Wild West in Latin America, even though you have rules about everything, nobody respect that. But I remember having these important examples about how to respect the rules and how to respect the legal frame. The reference was always Canada. Now I am here. And it's very important for me to reinforce that every day now that working with companies around the world from here, not moving from home. But for me, it's very important that building trust takes time. But the person who are in the next, side of the line, they need to feel that you are telling something that is real, that you are telling them the truth about the features of your technology, about the timeline, about every single detail. Even though they don't ask you for that, built from the beginning is, I think, is the best policy, and that's one of the thing that I always apply. You know, that is my random opinion about AI.
Good comment.
I don't think it's random. I think it's you know, if we don't trust the technology, we're not going to be able to harness the value of it. I think it's core. I think people just, I think it was Greg had a point earlier, like, all right, dirty laundry, here it is. Mm-hmm. Now, how do we fix it?
Yeah, I agree. It's only like we are 7+ billion of people around the world. So who is right? Who is wrong? You know, and I say all of us, we are right and wrong, because if you're right, okay, for another perspective, in another part of the world, they say, no, you are wrong. But how can I explain then? Okay, this technology is working for the people, our communities, your little town, your little farm, your business, small or big corporations are the the big actors that help you to incorporate, to help your society, your community. Is something that I always have in mind when I'm talking to people about these new technologies.
Good stuff. Thanks for that comment. So we're coming close to our time, so I think we'll kind of wrap it up. And I'm sure, Alyssa, you would welcome any sort of communication or folks going to the website and joining the community to try to get some of the background. It's a really is a fascinating area, and it's just so important as we move forward. Really important in the work that Data for Good does, and that other organizations do, to really have this type of awareness. And I really hope that the certificate is widely adopted and kind of sets a trend. And we also find ways to kind of move it down the stack as well, so that anybody, regardless of what size of organization you are, or kind of what you don't need expert skill levels, right, to kind of think about some of this stuff and act on some of this stuff as well.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for having me. And I've had let's call it a squiggly career where I don't have a tech background, and it hasn't really been linear in terms of, but the perspectives from all types of skill sets and people, and it's critical in this, because we really need it. And so thank you for having me and letting me talk about this thing, and that I'm really excited about and have a few opinions. And I encourage you to reach out. I encourage you to join our community. I'll send the slides to Oscar shortly. And if you have any nominations for who's doing awesome work in this space, we'd love to hear them. And just big thank you for doing what you do as well. So
great. Super. Thanks so much. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, and have a lovely evening.
We'll see you at our next meetup. Okay, bye now.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. Learned a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you've got a minute.
Stop the recording there, Oscar.